The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is a surprising game to be sure, but a welcome one. It's surprising because Aonuma made it clear Zelda wasn't going back to more restrictive linear gameplay, that the unrestricted open-air formula was the series' future. As a lover of this entire series, I was a firm believer that the right path forward lay in finding the balance between the linear elements of old Zelda and the freedom of the new games. But I had also resigned myself to the fact that Nintendo wasn't going to make that game. And then, they kind of did. Everything from this point forward can be considered spoiler territory. Echoes of Wisdom is the first Zelda game where you play as the titular heroine, but it starts with a playable Link. He feels really good to control. He's quick, snappy, powerful, and we never get to utilize him again. More on that later. Anywho, Zelda is freed, imposters are created, and with the Tri-Rod in hand, and a heavy emphasis on story in the early game, Zelda's adventure officially begins. In addition to the Tri-Rod's ability to create echoes, Zelda can bind and reverse bind, abilities you will most definitely forget you have until you come across a puzzle you can't solve and realize the solution involves one or both of these abilities, the Sword Fighter form, and later on, automatons. I found that these last two additions went against the spirit of the Echo ability, and that, while I enjoyed their inclusion in this version of the game, I think if the Echo system was refined just a bit more, they wouldn't be relevant or necessary. But as it stands, there is no mechanic to the Echoes other than the ability to summon them. You can summon them with impunity, whether they are recalled or destroyed, and this largely aids in your ability to exploit them, as many will attack immediately upon their summoning. When this immediacy isn't the case, especially early on, there will be times where you will be passively awaiting combat. Which is why I think the Sword Fighter and automatons were included, to act as scaffolding to bolster an incomplete system. Speaking of an incomplete system, the pausing and menuing of echoes is bad. In the early game, where the push of a button can pull up every echo you have, it's almost helpful. But as the game goes on and you make your way Pokemon style to collecting all 127 echoes, scrolling through the menus becomes untenable and lengthy and bad. Some echoes are absolutely busted. The water block, the flying tile, a murder of murderous crows, many of which make traversal in the still world, which is an interesting puzzle in the early game, a mere formality, almost touristy near its end. When not navigating endless menus, navigating the overworld is also a thing. And here's where that element of surprise I mentioned first comes in. You can go anywhere, but you can't do everything because a lot of the events that happen in certain areas are bound by the story. But there is still a ton of freedom. After the first dungeon, you have a choice between two more, and once you complete them and the mandatory fourth, more choices become available. In this way, progression is kept in check by the linearity of the narrative. The rewards for exploration are plentiful and generally good. You can collect a complete extra heart and some hefty echoes before entering the first dungeon. Caves can house either unique echoes, sometimes powerful ones, heart containers that aren't out in the open world, or charms, some of which can be bought, given rupees some purpose, or given as rewards for completing side quests. There are optional mini-dungeons complete with optional bosses, which may seem familiar, as well as might crystals to upgrade the Sword Fighter form's maximum duration or the adjacent powers therein. There are also non-mandatory rifts to clear, which can more quickly upgrade Tri's abilities. I still don't like the addition of quest markers on the map, especially for a world that isn't really that big. And lastly, while scattered hearts and beds can heal Zelda, there is also the inclusion of smoothies, the ingredients for which you'll find all over, but other than granting particular buffs, and for the purposes of healing in hero mode, I don't think they warranted inclusion, especially because making them is so tedious. Quick aside, we saw this overheating bit in some of the early trailers, but it wasn't a mechanic in the game, right? I'd like to be measured and not sound like a starving castaway plucked off an island into a buffet line, but another surprise, though heavy in the marketing, forgive me for not believing it, is the return of classic capital D dungeons. They are truly islands of restriction and an otherwise endless sea of freedom. I'm talking, a chest has a key which goes in a lock which opens a door. And for the most part, they're serviceable. They try some new things like heavily emphasizing 2D sections or throwing wrenches in their structure, especially in the case of Jabul Ruins and Farron Temple, and echoes are drip-fed to you as substitute dungeon items as you progress. This is supported by the pre-dungeon questing, which leads you to other portions of each area, both fleshing out the relationship between Zelda and the other characters, as well as acting as an excuse to broadly explore that area and collect its echoes. But I was hoping they'd do something more. Build on the foundation foundation of the puzzles they set up early in the temple and more thoroughly challenge my understanding of them later on. As an example, in Lanayru Temple, the gimmick is to thaw ice by heating up rooms. But all this puzzle amounts to is putting the emblem in the right place. The most this puzzle asks of you is to travel through more rooms between where the emblem is placed and where the effect occurs. But it never asks you to navigate the dungeon differently, like changing the water levels in Ocarina of Time's Water Temple or activating the switches in the Eagle's Tower of Link's Awakening. And just when it's getting interesting, when the dungeon demands you take that puzzle a step further, the big key is in hand and the puzzles are over. As another example, Farron Temple had 3 separate ideas that were never built on, as well as, because of its many entrances, a lot of navigational challenges, which were eventually nullified by the sheer number of warp points within the dungeon proper. I don't know for sure who Nintendo is aiming this game at, but it could very well be that the dungeons are this simple because for many of those who have become enamored with the Zelda franchise through the era of the Wilds games, this is their first taste of bona fide Zelda dungeons. The puzzles in general, and there are quite a lot of them, while largely simple, often felt more challenging than anything in the latest 3D installments, and couldn't be so easily gimped, though some rely on the same setup. Mainly the do something beyond these bars type puzzle, or recognize these suspicious samey looking boulders, while others were stumpers, until you remembered Bind. And many were integrated into the overworld, with caves acting as pseudo-shrines with puzzles to solve and actual genuine rewards to collect. A third surprise is that the game is largely driven by the story, albeit a simple one. That's not to say it's bad, it isn't, and stepping away from the time travel tropes of many of the past games was a necessary breath of fresh air. In its place, we got something new and something a bit deeper from what we already knew regarding the creation of Hyrule. In many cases, it is a radical departure from any Zelda story that's come before. Exceptionally more primordial, with a conflict so timeless it originated before the involvement of earthly creatures, but still affects the people of Hyrule today. And that's great, because Zelda isn't just about exploring the world, but rather about exploring your place in it. And in Echoes, we are an active part of the story. The themes of order and chaos which permeate this story don't typically graph to good and evil in our traditional world of myth. They just are. But I understand how that wouldn't work in a Zelda game. And while Echoes of Wisdom's story doesn't ascend to the heights of Tears of the Kingdoms, it also doesn't sink to its depths. I think the main plot is exactly what it needed to be for a top-down Zelda game. Different enough with a new, hopefully one-off villain. That said, the game is very character-driven, and I especially appreciate the messages of each of the main quest's characters. Yes, they are delivered simply, and sometimes abruptly, but they are both wholesome and uplifting, not to mention peak physique. And it's nice to see that, though rifts separate the world, they don't separate the relationships in it. Not for long, anyway. I also really like Link's characterization in this game. He's the purest form of a hero, doing what's right to protect the defenseless, which is exactly what he needs to be, and different from Zelda, the priestess protector of her kingdom. And while largely a curious, out of touch with human affairs sort, Tri is mostly great beyond some repetitive dialogue when encountering and entering rifts. One of the best Zelda companions in some time. Oh, also, Barren Wetlands is the best. The Dekus are the best. They are the absolutely right blend of endearing and sassy, and anyone who says anything otherwise is a bumpkin of the utmost degree and belongs in the clink. Lastly, and probably most surprising of all, is how much of an unbridled joy the end of Echoes of Wisdom is. We find Null's plan eerily similar to Ganondorf's at the midway point of Ocarina of Time, and we find similarities in the story beats when a long-lost friend appears. Eventually, along with Link, we make our way into the belly of the beast, where we have quite the final showdown with lengthy top-down and side-scrolling sections, before ripping the golden triangle from the very core of this corrupted creature, whose design is pretty great. My only complaint with this final act is there is not an associated dungeon to traverse with both a playable Zelda and Link, something that would have nicely mirrored the introduction where we do get to play as Link, and what surely would have given us a unique Zelda dungeon, swapping between Link and Zelda to solve puzzles, similar to Eastward. In the end, while the overarching plot could be rather bleak, Zelda's interactions with the other characters throughout Hyrule were nothing short of wholesome and endearing. While I don't think it's the perfect blend of the old and new, I had a lot of fun with it, and I do think it is a step in the right direction. A necessary experiment that I can't believe Nintendo even attempted, let alone produced. I'll leave you with this. I found Null to be very Majora's Maskian in his insatiable consumption for ultimate power. But also, like Majora's Mask, when the dust settles, Echoes of Wisdom ends with a necessary parting, and a fairy genuinely saying, "Thank you." 2 words you don't earnestly see in a game all that often. So, Nintendo and Grezzo, thank you for making this one.